make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter. We got our super-duper guest, ladies and gentlemen. We got her. Now I'm going to reveal who it is. It's the wife of a GOP presidential candidate you know well. And no, I'm not talking about Ann Romney. We got Carol Paul with us at the bottom of the second hour, and I will gladly open up the phones, ask whatever you want to know about the Paul family. I want to hear some stuff no one's ever heard before, so feel free to join me in trying to pry this information out of the wonderful Mrs. Paul. That's at the bottom of the second hour. First hour will be joined by economist Peter Klein, a just absolutely great guy, super brilliant, Berkeley PhD, Austrian economist, about his testimony at Ron Paul's monetary hearing earlier this week. But after this break, that will be coming in just shortly, we're going to be joined by, wait for it, Peter Schiff himself. We'll be calling in, find out what he's up to, what's going on, what he thinks about various things. We're going to try to get Peter to commit to something, to tell us what his opinion is on the economy. We'll pry that out of him in just a little while. I want to kick off the show today by answering a question I've gotten, I guess, several times just in the past week alone from people just curious to know. Now, by the way, there's a lot of news going on, right? I mean, there's gay marriage in the news, a lot of things to talk about. To heck with that. I want to do story time right now because people are asking, how did you get involved and interested in all this stuff? Like, what was it that changed your mind, that moved you into the Austrian camp and all this liberty stuff? Like, what was the thing that did it? Because today, you know, you're on a university campus, and it's almost a chic kind of thing to be involved in this. Like, going to a Ron Paul event is like the cool thing. It's like homecoming or something. But it wasn't so in the old days. So what was the thing? So here's the thing. So imagine some kid, namely me, growing up in a basically conservative New England town. I mean, as New England towns go, mine was conservative. That mine was the town where John Kerry would run for re-election to the U.S. Senate, and our town would vote for the other guy. Didn't matter who this guy was, our town voted for the other guy. So, I mean, you know, they had some sort of conservative instincts, and that was sort of where I'd been raised, a smallish town, 25,000 people. Then I go off to the middle of Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is full of the strangest people I've ever seen in my life. And I would go to the dining hall every night. This is 1990. It's the year I entered college. So, yes, I am turning 40 this year. That's a whole other show. So every night I'm going to the dining hall for dinner. And on my way to dinner, there is a group of people, the Friends of the Spartacus Youth Club, and they're selling the Workers' Vanguard newspaper. These are outright commies. These aren't people who say, well, I wish we could make the minimum wage $15 an hour or whatever. Now, we want to overthrow the whole wage system, of course. That would be a terrible sellout. These are commies who would say things like, we need to restore the great principles of the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, my being the way I am, I can't just walk by these people and let that stand. Like, if I see somebody saying something that's just grotesquely evil or ignorant, I've just got to stop and do something about it. I mean, that's just the way I am. I've tried to stop myself sometimes because you cannot correct all the errors in the world. But I would stop and engage these people in conversation. And I would ask them, well, how do they deal with the fact that their hero, Vladimir Lenin, was in fact a pretty bad guy too. He was a murderer, and by the end of his tenure in office, if that's what we want to dignify it as, he's got 50,000 people already in concentration camps. There was a secret police 16 times larger than the secret police under the czars. Is this really something to... And they would try and defend this, and this is a campus, by the way, where one of my professors actually had a guy named Zachary Lockman. He's not there anymore, but Zachary Lockman had us get our books for his course from a bookstore called Revolution Books. You go down into Revolution books, and I'm not joking, there are portraits of Mao on the wall. I mean, craziest mass murderer of the whole 20th century, and other major communist leaders. So these were people, when the Berlin Wall fell and the communist regimes in Eastern Europe fell, there were a lot of socialists who claimed, well, that wasn't real socialism, so we celebrate the fall of the wall as well. These were not that way. These people were absolutely not that way. I went to one of their meetings, and they had a presentation about how wonderful the Bolshevik Revolution had been in 1917, and that what we needed was, he sent around a collection plate, and we were expected to donate money for the purpose, this was 1991 now, for the purpose of helping to put the Soviet Union back together. Like these people really existed on the Harvard campus. That was, you would encounter these people on your way to the dining hall. So it was in the course of debating these people and reading and learning more history that I decided, I don't think I want to be a math major or an applied math major or any of these other things I was thinking about, because I thought I really want to throw myself into the world of ideas. This is where things happen. This is exciting and interesting. And also I found that all the other math majors, all they ever did was do math. And in their spare time, they read about number theory. But in my spare time, I was reading history. So I thought, well, maybe history is what I'm going to do. And that's basically how I wound up doing it. And then, thanks to the Mises Institute, the Ludwig von Mises Institute, Mises.org, MISES.org, I went to their week-long summer program in 1993 on Austrian economics, and I just never looked back. This was the greatest academic experience of my whole life, and it convinced me these people are right. They understand how the world works, and this is who I am. This is what I'm going to be. These are the causes I believe in. This is what I'm going to fight for. And so the commies indirectly threw me into the hands of the Austrians, because I basically came to the conclusion that the people on this campus are complete loons. And whatever these people are, I'm pretty sure I want to be the exact opposite. So I would go into the dining hall, and I'd be sitting down with my friends for lunch or dinner, and I'd be thinking to myself, oh, but there are people out there spewing errors. I just can't let this go on. I'd wolf my food down, get right back out there. I can't say I ever converted a commie. All right, but that is, I think you're asking a little bit too much here. I mean, these people are true believers, but the point is I converted myself. And that's the one thing Albert J. Nock, in his famous essay on The Remnant, he said, we may be in the minority. It's our job to find those of us out there who are in this minority who believe in individual liberty. And the one person in this world you can improve is yourself. You can hector and badger other people, but the only person you can improve, you can make smarter and more effective and a tougher fighter is yourself. Very important lesson when we think, gosh, we have a whole world to conquer for these ideas. Where do we begin? You begin, as Michael Jackson would say, with the man in the mirror. You get started on yourself. All right, everybody, we are going to a break. And on the other side of that break, Peter Schiff himself will be joining us from Brazil. We're going to find out what he's up to, what he thinks about what's going on in the world today with the euro, with Brazil, everything. That's right here on the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio.
The spaces in between. I want to live a life like that. I want to be just like a king. Take my picture by the pool, 'cause I'm the next big thing in Beverly Hills. That's where I want to be.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Beverly Hills.
9 out of 10 historians agree. If Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were alive today, both would be Schiff Radio Premium members.
Somewhere up there, Thomas Jefferson is looking down with great pride.
Schiff Radio continues right now.
All right, everybody, we're back on the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter, joined by the man himself, broadcasting to us from Brazil. We were just making the connection, and his first remark to us was, is that ocean sound in the background too much of a distraction? I thought, this guy, I am stuck in Topeka, Kansas, and there he is on the beach. Peter Schiff, how you doing in Brazil?
I am good. I'm here overlooking the ocean here at Ipanema. If you want to see where I am, I'm at a hotel called the Fasano, which is a relatively new hotel, and it's a nice atmosphere down here to spend a few days trying to soak in what's happening in the bricks of the brick. Brazil puts the B in bricks, so I'm down here doing my market research prior to going up to Sao Paulo to speak at the Mises Institute. But I am keeping an eye on what's going on in politics, in finance, in Europe. I've got Bloomberg on here in my hotel room.
Well, we would expect nothing less. Now, Hillary Clinton not too long ago was trying to claim that the success of Brazil was somehow connected with its high marginal income tax rates. I'm gonna suspect your view is a little different from that.
I doubt that highly. In fact, I would probably say that the lower the tax rate and the easier it is to avoid the taxes is going to be the key to the strength of your economy. The key is to keep money out of the hands of bureaucrats so it can stay in the hands of entrepreneurs and actually grow the economy. But, probably one of the stupidest things I've heard said while I was down here, I was watching Bloomberg yesterday, and the female host was talking about gold going down. And basically what she said was people are finding out that gold has no intrinsic value. It's just, a risk asset, and it has no real value. And so people are getting rid of their gold, which is the epitome in ignorance to say that gold, which is desired specifically because it has intrinsic value, has none, and somehow little pieces of paper that central banks run off a printing press, that is where the intrinsic value lies, that, there's nothing that stops the Fed from printing $1 million bill or $1 trillion bill. And technically there's no difference between the amount of paper in $1 trillion bill and in a $1 bill, yet they think that has intrinsic value, yet actual gold, which is scarce, which has to be mined at substantial costs, that somehow that gold with its unique properties has no intrinsic value has got to be one of the stupidest comments ever made on Bloomberg.
Well, it's no wonder that alternative media sources are popping up when you get stories like that, and that's why there's been so much success, I think, with the Mises Institute Brazil, because there are a lot of people who don't buy into that propaganda. And when you speak at their conference this weekend, I guarantee you that room's going to be filled with young people who all have heard of Peter Schiff and going to be cheering you like crazy. It's going to be surreal. They speak Portuguese and English, and they're going to love hearing from you.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time down here. Nobody speaks English, even or Spanish. I figured, okay, maybe I can use my high school Spanish down here in Brazil, but nobody even speaks Spanish. So it's it's surprising that how little beyond Brazil. Although the people in the hotel can speak English, but beyond that, it's not that easy. We got the trade deficit. I don't know if you had a chance to talk about it, but the April trade deficit came out today. It expanded by 14%, almost $52 billion, record high imports from almost every country on the planet that we trade with. We had record imports. And, obviously the economy is not growing if all we're doing is borrowing money to buy the things that other economies produce. Yet, you're going to hear no coverage at all today on the increasing trade deficit in the U.S., even as we focus on the problems in Europe. Nobody pays attention to the problems in America.
No, it's true. I was talking the other day about a very unfortunate comment by Mitt Romney, but I initially framed it to get the listeners' attention as a quotation from Krugman, where I said, look, Paul Krugman today says we can't cut $1 trillion out of the budget. That would wreck the economy and take people's jobs away. And then I said, you know what? Actually, that wasn't Krugman. That was Mitt Romney in a town hall speech. So we're doomed. Don't you think we're doomed?
Well, I mean, that's why my book is called The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy. So it's coming out. But, we had more bad news yesterday, and I guess it gets reported as good news. We had the biggest increase in consumer credit in 10 years. American consumers borrowed more money in any month in the last 10 years, and supposedly that's good news. A lot of the money was borrowed to go to college, because the economy is so bad that record numbers of Americans are going to college and borrowing record amounts of money to do it, despite the fact that the existing college grads already can't get jobs.
Right.
And so we're going to saturate the supply of worthless degrees and massive debt. And I think the rest of the debt came from Americans buying cars thanks to subsidies from the government, which is trying to prop up their stepchildren, General Motors and Chrysler.
Well, it's typical that they're constantly taking what should be bad news. Like they'll take something like, in such and such part of the country, home building is on the rise. We have a 1 million house overhang as it is. Like, why would that be a good thing? It just goes to show they're still misallocating resources.
Now, the last thing we need in America is to build more homes. I mean, what we need is more factories. I mean, it's obvious that we don't produce enough stuff with these trade deficits. What kind of productivity are we going to get from a house? There is none. I mean, yes, it gives you shelter, but we have record numbers of unoccupied homes overlying the market as it is. why should we build those? The only things maybe we should be building in some areas are apartments, because I read that in places like California now and in New York, rents are skyrocketing. I mean, they're rising rapidly. Why it doesn't show up in the CPI, you got me. But rents are rising very rapidly on the coast because there's not enough apartments, as all the people don't want the houses that already exist.
Right. Now, Peter, what was your reaction to the elections in France and Greece this week?
Well, I think it's typical. That's basically the problem with democracy, right? I mean, none of the voters, want to swallow the medicine that tastes bad, that cures the economy. They all want the miracle cure, the quick fix. They want to blame the politicians. But I'm not saying that the politicians are doing the right thing. I think that that there should be a lot more austerity, particularly when it comes to the bondholders. I don't think that you should simply ask taxpayers to foot the bill so that bankers can get bailed out. But also, you can't expect the government to continue to spend money lavishly on government programs. I was reading an article online today about how many companies in France have 49 employees, because the minute you hire the 50th employee, you can almost never do business. You have to have committees to help you organize your employees, and you can't fire anybody. I mean, you could be sued. I mean, the thing is, you have this culture built up in countries like France and obviously in Greece, where you have this entitlement, not only the entitlement from the government, but as if jobs or employers are there simply to serve the employees, that there's somehow some public entity, and that you have a right to your job, you have a right to your paycheck, and your employer has some kind of responsibility to supply it to you. And so that whole culture has to change in these countries, and you can understand that there's a reluctance once you have these generations of entitlement, that philosophy built up, and this idea that wealth comes out of thin air and that the government can create it. That was only perpetuated recently with the experiment with the euro, where you had countries like Greece or Italy or Spain that were now able to borrow money as if they, were now with the Deutschmark. People never would have loaned the Greeks all this money if they were going to get repaid in drachma, but because they figured that the euro was the new Deutschmark, the Greeks were able to go on a spending binge. That's what we did. We went on a spending binge because people think the dollar is gold. It's the reserve currency. And so we're committing all the same mistakes as Greece, and we're going to have to go through the same problems. That's why, Americans should pay attention to what's going on over there, because the same thing's going to happen here.
Peter, we have only about 2 minutes left. I want to get your thoughts on Brazil, where you are now. I mean, strengths and weaknesses, inflation. What's going on there? What should any lessons for us here?
Well, the Brazilian real, I'm looking at, the currency exchange rate as I'm down here, and, I'm getting about 1.9 real to the dollar. And back in 2003, 2004, you got 4 reals to the dollar. So the Brazilian real has risen sharply. In the last year, the real has dropped back a bit because it was down to about 1.6. And so we've had a rally in the dollar in the last year. But if you look at this longer-term trend, it's certainly up in the Brazilian currency. And, their foreign exchange reserves are swelling, again, which shows that these countries are creating too much inflation to try to keep their currencies from rising against the dollar. But this is where, the incomes are rising, the wealth is being generated. It's, you can see a lot of poverty on the way from the airport to the hotel. You can pass through a lot of very, very poorly constructed, dwellings for people. But then, you can see that there's more opulence and affluence. You go to the restaurants here and you walk around and you see how people are dressed. And the hotel that I'm staying at, the rooms are just a basic room is about $1,000 a night, yet they're jam packed. There's definitely economic activity going on down here. And I think this is all these emerging markets that I think there's a lot of opportunity here. China, India, that's the future. They're embracing the free market principles more slowly than ideally, but the same principles that we're abandoning are the ones they're embracing.
Peter Schiff, thanks so much for the update. Have a great time in Brazil and Vegas next week.
Hey, Peter, thanks for pinch hitting in my absence.
No problem at all. Peter Schiff, everybody. Stick around for the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio, on the other side of this break.
So down I want to go,
so cold I have to go.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back on the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter. Joined right now by economist Peter Klein, who testified at the hearing that was held earlier this week on the Federal Reserve in the House, the Domestic Monetary Policy Subcommittee chaired by Ron Paul. We had a number of economists on that panel, two of whom called for just unconditionally disbanding the Federal Reserve. Peter Klein holds a Ph.D. in economics from the University of California at Berkeley. He's a professor. He teaches economics at the University of Missouri. He's an author of a great many published articles, a book called The Capitalist and the Entrepreneur, editor. He's got, well, actually a number of books to his credit, but editor of the collected works of F.A. Hayek. And I'm also glad to welcome him now as a, not a Kansan, but a pretty darn close Missourian here to the Peter Schiff Show. Peter Klein, welcome.
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Doing well. I want to get from you, now I've posted over at my site, tomwoods.com, I posted the YouTube of the whole hearing. It was Jeff Herbener and you as the good guys, and then it was like as you go from left to right, they get worse. And we had Taylor. It's like they organize it this way, all these hearings, but you guys got to speak first. I want to get a sense of, because your written testimony is great. You have to summarize it, though, orally in only 5 minutes. Is this the first time you've given congressional testimony, or have you done this before?
Yeah, no, this was the first time. I have addressed the same subcommittee in a less formal setting. They hold some monthly dinners where someone will come and summarize a particular topic. And I have addressed some of the members of the committee before, but this was the first time to do it in a formal setting. It was an interesting experience.
Now, describe for us what the scene looks like. Is it that you're speaking to a room full of congressmen who are very deeply interested in monetary policy and they want to get a fresh set of new ideas, or was it something else?
Sorry, I'm chuckling to myself a little bit. You know, the way that C-SPAN and the other television networks sort of orchestrate these hearings, it would appear like the former. However, in reality, it's mostly an empty room. The hearing room is set up with the members of the committee, Ron Paul and his associates on this subcommittee in the very back row. Then there's several rows of seats for other members of the House, almost none of whom showed up. And then there are the speakers at the other end of the room. It was interesting. Ron Paul, who's the chairman, of course, of the subcommittee, and one other representative, Nan Hayworth of New York, were the only committee members who attended the entire hearing. It was about a 2.5-hour hearing. Most of the other members of the subcommittee would sort of pop into the room right before it was their turn to speak. They would then ask a tough question of the panel. In other words, they would have themselves filmed asking a tough question of the panel, and then they would run out again. So I guess they have a little something to show to their constituents about, you know, how they're really actively engaged in, you know, learning about monetary policy and examining, you know, the issues and so forth. But really, there were only a handful who seemed like they were genuinely interested and curious to learn about these. There were some 6 legislative proposals for reforming, or in Ron Paul's case, abolishing the Fed. But I think most of these hearings, you know, it's really sort of political theater. It's designed to look a certain way to the folks back home. Now, of course, it's great that Ron Paul is doing this because our written statements become part of the congressional record. You know, the hearings are televised. So now you and I and other people who are sort of, you know, on our side of the debate have a lot of new material that we can get out. We have videos to show. We have articles, you know, to disseminate the testimonies and so on. But I don't think it's really aimed at changing the policy process.
Well, I always sort of fantasize about somebody 100 years hence just looking through casually through the congressional record and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe this hearing was even held.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, of course, the fact that it was held is really remarkable if you look at the standard, you know, business news sites and political news sites that keep track of these kinds of hearings. I mean, you could almost detect a little note of surprise as they're reporting, all the mundane events that went on the Hill that day. And, oh my goodness, hearings on reform or even abolition of the Federal Reserve System. That's not the kind of thing they're used to reporting on.
No, it certainly isn't. Now, I do want to, perhaps maybe after the break, I want to get into your own testimony and the arguments that you made, but I want to actually skip ahead to Professor Taylor of Stanford, because he's so well known as a monetary economist and as somebody who developed the so-called Taylor Rule.
Right.
Can you just explain to the layman, what is the Taylor Rule, and why is it, in your view, not, he's considered to be like a right-of-center sort of free market guy, but why is it not the solution to our monetary problems?
Well, to answer in a slightly roundabout way, among kind of mainstream economists, who I would call more or less Keynesian in their framework and their outlook, although I'm not sure Professor Taylor would like to be called a Keynesian, I think he is certainly among the best. One of the old debates about monetary policy among those who think that we, of course, should have the government in charge of monetary policy is the distinction between rules and discretion. So Milton Friedman, for example, as a mainstream, and I think you could even call him a Keynesian economist in a sense, argued that, yes, we should have a central bank, we should have fiat money, the government should be in charge of the financial system, but the government should act in a very restrained way. It should announce a rule. Friedman argued for a fixed rate of growth in the money supply, that the Fed should announce that the money supply will increase by, say, 2% per year, and it should not deviate from that if there's a recession or some extraordinary circumstances, as opposed to the more activist and traditional Keynesian view that, of course, the government should use monetary policy and fiscal policy as well to fine-tune, to stabilize the economy. The money supply should increase at a faster rate during recessions and maybe a slower rate during periods of prosperity and so on. So what John Taylor did is come up with, sort of an algorithm, a mathematical formula that is a little bit more flexible than something like Friedman's fixed money growth rule. So Taylor has a formula that says, well, the money supply should increase by X, where X is a function of the current unemployment rate, things that are going on in foreign exchange markets, inflation rates, and so on. In other words, there still would be some variation in how much the money supply, the fiat currency money supply, increases in a given year, but it wouldn't be up to policymakers to just, the Federal Open Market Committee or Ben Bernanke to just choose. They would be bound by a complicated but transparent formula. So anybody could predict, if they had access to the right data, what the increase in the money supply would be. So it's better than having Ben Bernanke at the wheel saying, oh, we should steer left, steer right. But, it still is based on the view that the economy needs an increase in fiat currency, an increase in bank reserves, when times are tough. And so, it adopts the basic Keynesian framework, but it tries to take the specifics of monetary policy out of the discretionary hands of individuals and put it in the hands of a rule. It could be done by a computer instead of by people.
And then, of course, in your testimony, you were basically saying that if discretion, is bad, then why don't we just get rid of discretion instead of trying to minimize it or channel it into different algorithms or whatever? Maybe we should just have a monetary system that's more or less run just according to the normal laws of commerce. Now, what did the other economists have to say? Because I'll admit I didn't listen to their testimony, not because I'm closed-minded, but because my time is limited, and I just wanted to hear what my friends had to say. But it was James Galbraith and Alice Rivlin. Were those the last two on that panel?
Right, they were, and Rivlin is a former vice chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, so not exactly what you would call a disinterested party. Mm-hmm. James Galbraith is a very left-of-center labor economist, best known, of course, as being the son of the infamous John Kenneth Galbraith. And, it's interesting, there's not a whole lot of back and forth among the panelists with one expert commenting on another expert's testimony. Each expert only has 5 minutes to give a summary, so you don't want to waste your 5 minutes, smashing something that somebody else said. So there wasn't a whole lot of back and forth. At one point later in the hearing during the Q&A, one of a Democratic representative of the committee, Representative Green, asked each member, quickly by show of hands, who would support eliminating the Federal Reserve System. And Jeff Herberner and I raised our hands, the others did not. Then he sort of went down the line, well, how can you explain that? How can you justify that? And we had maybe a sentence or two to answer. Then he went back the other direction on the panel and said, well, do you think it would be harmful to the U.S. economy if we were to get rid of the central bank and get rid of the Federal Reserve System while the other major economies still have central banks? And Alice Rivlin said something like, yes, I can imagine that the U.S. could possibly survive without a central bank, without a lender of last resort. She said, I find that view bizarre. So that was the closest anybody came to addressing what Jeff Herberner and I said. But I think to be called bizarre, to have one's views on monetary theory and policy be called bizarre by a vice chair of the Federal Reserve System is sort of a badge of honor.
So, yeah, right, indeed, yeah, right. So I find it bizarre that we could get by without a giant bailouter sitting there. I mean, because she's specifically citing the lender of last resort function.
That's right. I mean, I would have been tempted to say, if under different circumstances, something like, well, sure, if you asked, Paul Samuelson in 1988 or 1989, do you think the Soviet Union might ever fall apart and we ever might have some attempt at having free markets in the former Soviet bloc? He would have said, well, I find that view completely bizarre. Yeah. Right, during the 1930s, the idea that Keynesianism would be challenged in some way might be considered bizarre. So, lots of good ideas are bizarre before you really think about them.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, you couldn't have been more wrong on the Soviet Union predictions. We were hearing Paul Samuelson say that sky was the limit for those people. All right, on the other side of this break, I want to get Peter Klein's testimony about his own testimony. Talk about, do we need the Fed for stable prices and all this other stuff? That's next on the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You're now enrolling in the Peter Schiff School of Advanced Economics. Twice the education of a Harvard MBA. For 168,000th the cost.
And we are back on the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter, talking to Peter Klein of the University of Missouri about the hearing that took place earlier this week before the Domestic Monetary Policy Subcommittee of the U.S. House. Peter, before we go on, there's a news item here that I'm seeing. Reads as follows. The Bank of England voted not to give Britain's struggling economy another cash injection on Thursday, as concerns over stubbornly high inflation outweigh the risk of a prolonged recession and renewed dangers from the Eurozone debt crisis. So basically they're pitching this as ending its program of quantitative easing, even though it's keeping its key interest rate at 0.5%. So the hawkishness has to be kept in perspective here. Well, how do you respond? I mean, what's your reaction to that? Is there anything significant about this?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen that particular news item, but, look, the whole premise of these stories and that kind of approach to the economy is based on the, completely discredited notion of a stable Phillips curve. I mean, the Phillips curve is this idea that, well, there's always a trade-off between, high unemployment and high inflation. So I remember Murray Rothbard used to use a great analogy of, the government, the central bank and the Treasury Department and so on, driving this truck on a narrow road that's on the side of a hill, and if you steer a little bit too far to the left, you'll fall off the cliff. If you steer a little bit too far to the right, you'll smash into the side of the mountain. And it's the job of the skilled central planner to always maintain this balance. I mean, look, the way you read the headline and the summary implies that, look, well, the government's been doing a good job trying to stimulate the economy, but now we're worried about too much inflation, so the government needs to step off the gas a little bit and maintain this fine balance between inflation and unemployment. I mean, it's just the whole framework needs to be thrown out the window. And of course, it has been thrown out the window by most sensible economists, over 3 or 4 decades. But in the policy world and in the world of journalism, everyone still seems to believe that, well, if the government steps on the gas by injecting too much liquidity and too much quantitative easing, that's good for boosting us and getting more growth and bringing down unemployment, but we have to watch out for the danger of inflation, at which point the government needs to ease off the gas pedal a little bit. I mean, the whole thing's just ludicrous.
And the Phillips curve itself, it seems like whatever validity it may have had, which I don't think it does because the theory behind it doesn't make sense, but it seems to be that if you do see any historical relationship between inflation and unemployment, it was just a happenstance, contingent historical factors. It wasn't some kind of universal law that was bound to occur at all times. I mean, the 1970s disproved it right there, right then and there. All right,
that's exactly right.
Now let's talk a little bit about your own testimony. Now you are making some arguments that are familiar against the Fed, but you weren't just saying the Fed gives rise to business cycles because of Austrian business cycle theory. You said, I'm going to approach this from the point of view of what I do, which is namely I'm an organizational economist. What does that actually mean, and what kind of insight into the Fed does that give you?
Right. So what I thought I would do, because there are of course a lot of criticisms of Fed policy, how the Fed actually tries to manage the economy and so on, from the Austrian school and even from some good Chicago economists and other critics of an activist Fed. But I thought rather than focus exclusively on that, I would try something a little bit different, partly knowing that Jeff Herbener would go through in a very systematic way the basics of sort of the Austrian view of money and how monetary policy causes the business cycle and so on. I wanted to touch on that, but say, look, the problem is not that the Fed has made some bad decisions. And if only we could control the Fed and get it not to generate the business cycle in this way or that way, we will be better off. I said, look, let's approach this from a more systematic point of view. So what I study mainly is organization theory, which is sort of how entities like firms, even government agencies, bureaucracies, nonprofits, how they are structured, how they're governed, how they're organized. What incentives do different individuals, different decision makers have? What are sort of the constraints? So, for example, one of the great contributions of the Austrian school is, of course, the demonstration that centralized economic planning under socialism cannot possibly work as a way of allocating resources in an economy. And the key thing is, for Ludwig von Mises and F.A. Hayek and others who articulated this argument, they weren't saying that central planning is a bad idea because you get bad people in charge, because the socialist planners tend to be brutal dictators or they're not very bright. I mean, that may be true, but that's not the core of their argument. They said even if you put an angel in charge of a centrally planned economy, even if you put Tom Woods in charge of planning the USSR, it still wouldn't work because that's an impossible task for a central economic, dictator to accomplish. So I said, look, what if you put angels in charge of the Federal Reserve System? What if if you made Ron Paul chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, but you gave him the mandate to maintain full employment and stable prices by controlling the supply of fiat money and so on? Well, even Ron Paul couldn't do that. Of course, Ron Paul would shut the whole thing down, but assuming he didn't shut it down and he were required to sort of maintain the Fed under its current rules, it wouldn't work because giving that much authority with that little oversight to a super, super, super powerful government bureaucracy is just a recipe for disaster, right? So one of the big issues among economists in the last few years has been the importance of a so-called independent central bank. So when Ron Paul and to his credit, people like Barney Frank have called for greater oversight of the Fed, a lot of economists say, no, you can't have this. You can't have Congress or the people at large having any influence over the central bank, because then the central bank will just pander to the interests of Congress. Instead, we need something that Alice Rivlin said in her testimony multiple times, a strong and independent central bank. So in my testimony, I said, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be independent? What does it mean to have an independent central bank? It means a central bank that is completely unaccountable. They can do anything it wants without any sort of external constraint. There's no consequence of making an error. right? So if Tom Woods is hosting the Peter Schiff show and Tom Woods does a really horrible job, well, then people will stop listening, advertisers will stop advertising, and there will be consequences. Tom Woods will not be invited back, or Peter Schiff, his show will be canceled or whatever.
I don't like this example that you're using.
Competing on the free market. I'm using a highly fanciful example.
Yeah, of course.
We know in reality the reverse is true. But for the Fed, the Fed can do whatever it wants, and there's no consequence. There's no guidance. There's no competition between the Fed and somebody else. The Fed is an absolute monopolist with, its finger on a button that could, has the potential to do enormous harm to the U.S. economy. I think that's a bad system. That's giving too much power to fallible human beings. They may be technocrats, supposedly apolitical technocrats, but I don't want technocrats in charge of running my life, and I don't think we want to put them in charge of running the economy. So that's what it means to approach this issue from the point of view of organization theory, to say the whole setup of the Federal Reserve System with concentrated power and lack of oversight is just a bad situation.
Peter, if I give you 10 seconds, can you tell people where, if anywhere online, they can find you?
Oh, sure. They can go to petergklein.com, or if you just Google Peter Klein or Peter Klein Economics, usually my website comes up as the very first hit.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your time today. Peter Klein, everybody, coming right back. Peter Schiff Show.
Make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Second hour of the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter. Taking your calls at 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Going to be taking some calls till the bottom of the hour. By the way, when we say bottom of the hour, we mean like 11:30, 10:30. That's the bottom. The top of the hour would be 11, 12, whatever. This is just cool radio talk we sometimes lapse into. But at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have Carol Paul joining us, the wife of Congressman Ron Paul. And we're going to try and tease out of her some secrets of the Paul household that have never been revealed before. Will be exclusively revealed here on the Peter Schiff Show. And, of course, be sure to call in for your questions for her at that time. But I'm glad to take your calls right now. Remember, Friday night, tomorrow night, at Remington Park Casino in Oklahoma City, big Liberty rally I'll be speaking at. I'm bringing my almost 9-year-old daughter. It'll be more or less her first event traveling with Daddy to one of these things, and it's going to be really exciting. So you can get the details on that at my site, tomwoods.com. I'm just about to go. I've got a very interesting call here on the line that I'm just about to take. But I want to point out, one thing I like about Amazon is that I have on my site, when I link to books, I have an affiliate account with them. So I have this special link if I want to link to my books or Peter's book or whatever. If somebody clicks on it and buys it, well, I get, like 50 cents or some crummy return or whatever. But the beautiful thing about it is I get it for doing absolutely nothing. That's the best kind of all. That ticks the left off the most, right? Because it didn't involve physical manual labor, so it doesn't really count. Well, it doesn't matter. I get money for doing it. So I've been badgering you guys this week about my site, libertyclassroom.com, which is my best, most important work I've ever done, just to train people, just to teach people history and all this stuff that you get the distorted version of when you're in school. Well, we just this morning launched our affiliate program, so just like Amazon, you get a special link, but instead of getting 50 cents or whatever, every time somebody subscribes through your link, you get $20. And if 10 people subscribe, you get $200. You could just quit your job and do this. So check that out over at the blog on libertyclassroom.com, and I also talk about it at tomwoods.com. Let us go now to the phones. I want to talk to Jordan in Cincinnati. Jordan, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Sounded like you cut out there for a second. I had a question from something you were talking about yesterday. yesterday you talked about how Teddy Roosevelt was really a bad president and all the horrible stuff he did. Well, I was just wondering who you think the best president would have been. Of course, given the caveat that they're all a bunch of bums anyway.
Right. Okay, that's an excellent question. Thanks, Jordan. My opinion on this was formed. I can give you the exact date, or not the exact date. I can give you the year. 1998 was when I came to the opinion that I have now about who the best president was, and that was because I was at a conference called Reassessing the Presidency, and Professor Jeff Hummel, who teaches out on the West Coast, was giving a paper on the greatest U.S. president. And you may have some guesses. You may think it's Warren Harding or Calvin Coolidge or even Grover Cleveland. But you'd be wrong. He proposed Martin Van Buren. Now, I bet there are some people listening who didn't even know Martin Van Buren was a president at any time. But yeah, Martin Van Buren was elected in 1836, and he was the vice president under Andrew Jackson after Jackson had his falling out with John C. Calhoun. And the reason that Hummel credits Van Buren as being the best president is more or less twofold. I mean, there are other things that you could find, but number one is he was president during the Panic of 1837, and he strongly resisted calls for government intervention to soften the blow of the recession and the panic. And his view was, no, the economy's got to clear itself out of the imbalances and whatever. I mean, he's kind of the sort of thing we would want a president to do and say today, and under terrific pressure to abandon his laissez-faire principles, but he refused to. He also helped to bring about the independent treasury system. The independent treasury system was a system whereby, I mean, I guess the way you could describe it is in a slogan: the separation of bank and state. That's really what it was. After Andrew Jackson got rid of the second bank of the United States, he then took the federal deposits and distributed them into the state banks, which became known as his pet banks. Whereas it was Van Buren's view that, no, we're just going to have this independent treasury over here, and it's going to sit on the funds, and they're not going to have any political manipulation or any of that. We're not going to enrich the banking community or anything. We're just going to have this independent treasury. And the more we look at the period of the independent treasury, the more we have to conclude that this may have been the best, the soundest monetary system in terms of sheer results and stability. That, by the way, I wasn't saying instability. I was saying and stability that we've ever had. And then secondly, so that was all one big thing there of laissez-faire, resistance to intervention in the Panic of 1837, independent treasury, which is the closest thing to laissez-faire in banking that you could get. And then finally, he managed to avoid 2 wars. And so, I mean, all these things you put together, it's the opposite of the usual thing. The usual thing is you get these surveys of the presidents that historians do, and they rank the presidents every once in a while. I mean, you should ignore these things. Well, so-and-so was the best president, so-and-so was only the 7th best, and this one was 35th or whatever. There's no objective standard for evaluating the presidents. There's no way you can evaluate them and say everyone must agree that the 4th best president was James Madison or something like that. There's no way you can do that without smuggling in moral considerations here, because what if I think the things these presidents did were moral outrages? The very things that you, the historian, thinks are super and great, I think are violations of the Constitution and morally outrageous. How can I agree with your ranking? The rankings are just an episode, or an exercise in historians trying to make themselves feel important, because they're going to tell us what we should think about our own presidents. And no free people should think that way, right? I mean, a free people, we make our own decisions based on our own values, based on what we know about these presidents. And so there's it's a good little book that goes through the presidents. I'm not sure I always agree with it, called Recarving Rushmore, where it goes through each president and it gives you a basic overview of the good and the bad and then ranks them. And the rankings in that book are totally different from the sort of rankings you get. Now, where does Van Buren show up in all these rankings? Is Van Buren at the top for his humble view of the presidency, for viewing the presidency as an office whose occupant simply executes the laws? He humbly executes the laws. He doesn't engage in massive social engineering or a New Deal or a Square Deal or a fair deal or a new covenant or a whatever. Does he get credit for that? No, to the contrary. He's buried in the middle somewhere because nobody knows what to do with Van Buren. And he just languishes in obscurity. He doesn't deserve that. I mean, he's one of the rare people who occupied that office that you can say, I'm not embarrassed by this guy, and I'm not horrified by this guy, relatively speaking. All right, we've got some more calls on the other side of this break, but we've got room for yours as well. 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-472-4433. The Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio.
The Peter Schiff Show.
If knowledge is power, then the Peter Schiff Show is a uranium-enriched 10,000 megawatt nuclear reactor. Stay plugged in. Stay brilliant. This is the Peter Schiff Show.
And we're back on the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter. Coming up in the next segment is Carol Paul, wife of Congressman Ron Paul. And presumably you've got something you've wanted to ask this woman that maybe Ron Paul himself wouldn't even answer. Something you want to ask her. Now is your chance. So get yourself in line at 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-472-4433. I'd love to take calls during that segment. But speaking of calls, let's go to Tammy in Pensacola, Florida. Tammy, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Yes, thank you. I want you to compare the mom-and-pop family businesses versus the big corporate, the big chains, and how that affects our economy.
Okay, Tammy, thanks for the call. So we're talking about mom-and-pop businesses versus big corporations and how this affects the economy. I think the causation's the other way around. The issue is, I think to the contrary, how does the economy, which the economy basically, what is the economy? The economy is just basically you and me and other people making exchanges. That's all it is. And the fruits of those exchanges are the various firms that we see on the market catering to us, that they see, well, people want to make such and such exchange. They want this product. They want that product. So I'm going to take labor, land, raw materials, capital goods, and combine them in a way that satisfies these demands. And the array of firms and the size of those firms that we see that arise on the market is a response to the economy, is a response to these demands. Now, it's true that in the economy as it exists now, there are all kinds of privileges, special privileges of various kinds that certain firms enjoy. And the larger firms often do have special privileges. For example, very often they have access to regulatory bodies at a moment's notice that obviously some small mom-and-pop store wouldn't have access to. So some law is being debated about toy safety, supposedly to help the children, and then you look and you realize that the Mattel Corporation is pushing for this law because they know that it'd be very hard for a small craftsman to comply with it. Well, that's obviously unfair, and these sorts of things have to be uprooted and identified. And the most level playing field that we can possibly have should be established just by removing the artificial benefits that accrue to the larger firms as a result of the cushy relationship they have with the federal government on the in politics. And of course, there are also ways in which the Federal Reserve will benefit the big players, and certainly in the financial world, obviously the largest banks. Well, as I mentioned yesterday, the smaller banks have to lend at a premium. It's a modest premium, but in volume, it amounts to a lot of money because no one has the assurance that they're all going to be bailed out the way they do have the assurance that the big players are going to be bailed out. So, it really comes back to Andrew Jackson's statement years ago when he was running for president, and it was the 1820s and 1830s, and his slogan, or the slogan that was attached to him, was equal rights. And what was meant by equal rights was not that the rich should be penalized to make them equal to the poor. It was that no one should get any special privilege that's derived through coercion. That was his principle. That's what he meant by equal rights, and I think that's where we need to come down. But in terms of the size of the firm or the size of the business, if there is no non-arbitrary way to know how big a business should be. Obviously, an automobile manufacturer has to be big in order to be able to afford to capitalize itself. You couldn't have a mom-and-pop airline, let's say, or a car manufacturer just in the very nature of things. There's no way they could have the necessary capital. Also, what if mom-and-pop become very successful and their business, whatever it is, continues to grow and grow? Their success is a reflection of the fact that we like what they're doing. Every we have these votes in elections where we vote for some creep, And it doesn't mean anything, and that person wins or loses, and it had nothing to do with our vote. And if the guy wins 51 to 49%, and we were in the 49%, we have to suffer through it anyway. That's not true with the votes you cast on the market. If you don't vote for some firm, then that firm doesn't get your benefit, and you don't have to be stuck with its crummy product. But if you do vote for somebody, for some product, you get that thing. And if a mom-and-pop business expands, that's because our dollar votes are giving them the wherewithal to expand. And that means that they're just doing what we want them to do. So if they continue to grow, I don't think it would be good for us to then say, well, now the mom and pop has become big, and now I don't like them anymore. Because I don't think there's some absolute standard of saying, well, now this is too big. I mean, are we just going to consult with some economic planner every month and say, now, has this firm grown too big? And if so, should we rein it in? I think we should just think in terms of everybody has a level playing field. And in this economy, in this day and age, you got to find what your niche is. And it's also funny how large firms like, let's say, eBay, make possible, actually, the flourishing of a whole bunch of small firms. There are a whole bunch of small booksellers, for example, that would have had a heck of a time competing, trying to sell physical books in a digital age in one little store with a whole bunch of random books that people just have to have sold to them. But now through eBay, you've got not just booksellers, but small sellers of all kinds of niche products or products that they craft themselves. They now have an ability to reach, maybe there aren't enough people in their town to support that business. And if it weren't for the big eBay, these poor mom and pop businesses would go out of business. But it's because of big giant eBay or big giant Amazon Marketplace that they can now reach a huge constituency of potential buyers of their products. I mean, I think we need to look in terms of the ways that things that might otherwise scare us because it's too big or it's gargantuan can also be turned to the service of the small seller to help that small seller find his niche and find enough demand for his product for him to survive. Now, before we go to the so again, Tammy, thanks for that call. Before we go to our next break, which is coming up in about 4-ish minutes, I want to just finish off some points I didn't have time to get to with Peter Klein. In the meantime, call us up for Carol Paul, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-472-4433. But I want to read to you a really chilling passage from the Klein testimony to Congress. This is Peter Klein quoting Greg Mankiw. Now, Greg Mankiw is, I think, actually recently became the chairman, if I'm remembering this right, of the Department of Economics at Harvard, but he is a professor there. And Mankiw here, the passage I'm about to read to you, is Mankiw's response to a group of economists in 2008 who were warning about TARP and arguing that it was not the way to go. Here's what Greg Mankiw had to say to them. He says, quote, "I know Ben Bernanke well. Ben is at least as smart as any of the economists who signed that letter, it was a letter saying TARP is a bad idea, or are complaining on blogs and editorial pages about the proposed policy. Moreover, Ben is far better informed than the critics. The Fed staff includes some of the best policy economists around. In his capacity as Fed chair, Ben understands the situation. If I were a member of Congress, I would sit down with Ben privately to get his candid view. If he thinks the bailout is the right thing to do, I would put my qualms aside and follow his advice." Now, that is just stunning. I mean, there is the establishment right there in so many words. And as Peter Klein comments on that passage, he says, "One can hardly imagine a more dangerous perspective on government decision-making. It ignores differences in theoretical frameworks between, say, Keynesian, Austrian, monetarist, New Classical, and other economists. It ignores differences in the interpretation of data, which is a matter of judgment, not intelligence. It ignores the possibility that key decision-makers, including Fed and Treasury officials, have private and conflicting interests. And, of course, it ignores normative concerns. Some citizens may oppose rewarding incompetent managers with taxpayer funds, regardless of the efficiency consequences. More generally, Mankiw's argument would seemingly apply to any and all forms of government economic planning. Why have markets at all if we can have smart, well-informed planners directing the allocation of resources?" That's Peter Klein commenting on Greg Mankiw. Well, there it is. I mean, that's really quite stunning. Another thing that's said and that Peter addresses, and Jeff Herbener in his testimony, Tom Elliott, our producer, reminds me that Mankiw now works for Mitt Romney. I forgot about that. That's right. both of these people offering anti-Fed testimony talked about the issue of stable prices. And I realize that I say stable prices and Fed in the same sentence, and people want to laugh when you look at the graph of the dollar's purchasing power over the course of the history of the U.S. Republic, and it's a flat line until basically until 1971, when the last remnants of the gold standard were removed, and then bang, it goes straight upward. But the Fed tries to say with a straight face that we need an institution to guarantee stable prices because that will assist in entrepreneurial calculation. But the point is, in trying to bring about the stable prices, if prices were trending downward, they want to increase them through artificial intervention. This interferes with monetary calculation. How are people supposed to calculate profits effectively? They don't know, is this real profit? Is this because the Fed is trying to bump the price level up? Entrepreneurs can function in a price level falling economy just as easily as they can in a stable price economy or in a price rising economy. As long as they can anticipate it, they can bid accordingly for the factors of production. So they bid down for the factors of production if they expect the consumer prices to go down by the time they produce the product. And if they don't anticipate it, well, same with anything on the market. They fail to anticipate something, that's what you get as an entrepreneur. And you may go bankrupt, but then other people take over. It's not the end of the world. All right, we got Carol Paul on the other side of this break. 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-472-4433. The secrets of the Paul household next on The Peter Schiff Show.
The Peter Schiff Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Rebel Radio. The Peter Schiff Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this right here is the highlight of the whole program. We are joined now by the matriarch of the Paul household, wife of Ron Paul, Mrs. Carol Paul. It is really my pleasure to welcome you to the Peter Schiff Show. Thanks so much for being here with us. I want to ask, first of all, about your husband. How is he holding up? I mean, we all know he's in very robust physical health, but this is a really, really demanding schedule for anybody. How is he hanging in there?
Well, he's doing really well, and he tries to keep his exercise schedule going. He likes to walk about 3 miles each morning, and he likes to ride his bike about 10 or 11 miles or more in the afternoon. But when he's on the road, he can't do that. Sometimes he gets the walking in, but as soon as he gets home, he tries to make up for it, and he gets out and works in his garden and just really believes in physical exercise.
Well, that's great. Now, you've been joining him on the campaign trail a little bit. What's that been like?
Well, it's pretty hectic, in and out of airplanes and in and out of cars, but the people are wonderful. We just haven't met anyone that hasn't been supportive. Of course, there are crowds, and they prove it as soon as Ron appears on the stage. Why, you know they're all supporters. But it's been great. I mean, we have thousands at each rally, and I saw a video that showed some of them just yesterday, and that's the first time I've seen anything. Of course, nothing in the main media or the news, but this was, of course, on the internet, and it was tremendous.
Now, this must be amazing for you, because I saw on YouTube not long ago a speech that your husband gave in 1988 when he was running for president, and it was a very, very small crowd. I mean, what is it like for you to walk out and see these huge, huge throngs of people cheering him?
Well, it's absolutely great, and I think it's wonderful because Ron has carried this message a long time, and it's, engraved on his heart, and to see people finally realizing, I mean, he knew they would because he knew economically that we were coming to this. And he's been so worried about our country. I mean, now when we should be sitting back with our feet up, just playing with our grandkids, he's out there doing what would be a tough job for a young man. But he is really so worried about our country. He said if he knows what's wrong with the country and does nothing, then he will be just as bad as those that are doing it. So, how can you object to that?
Well, it's really admirable. I want to ask you, though, kind of a personal thing, because you introduced your husband at the Nevada Republican Convention just days ago, and you sort of let slip a little story that I had never heard before about, I guess your husband delivered 2 of your children, and you kind of hinted that one of them was sort of delivered either by accident by him or by surprise. You got to share that with us. What happened there?
Well, it was our second child, and Ron was dressed for the delivery room because he was on obstetrics as a student. And my mother had come from Pennsylvania to watch our first child, Ronnie. And so he had gotten her there and had come to the house. And I said, I think I'm having maybe a few contractions. And he said, well, give me a call, because he was on call. So he dropped my mother off, and then he went to the hospital. And this was in Durham, North Carolina at Duke. So we were not very far from the house, and we did not have a lot of traffic between our house and the hospital. So the evening wore on a little bit, and he called me up, and he said, how you doing? And I said, well, I have some contractions every now and then, but nothing routine or regular. So he said, okay, well, let me know. So Mother and I just continued on, getting things ready and taking care of Ronnie and et cetera. And all of a sudden, Ron came in the door, and he says, I just ought to come home and just see how you're doing for just, I had a little break. And so I had a contraction. I said, wow, I felt that. And he said, well, why don't you just go back with me? Even if it's a false alarm, why don't you just ride back with me? So we went back to the hospital, and they checked me in and took me to a room, and Ron was just sitting there talking to me, and I said, I don't remember these pains being this hard. And he said, you've just forgotten, what they're like or something. I said, well, it's pretty hard. And so just to humor me, he just kind of walked over and took a look, and he says, oh, my gosh, there's the head and black hair.
Oh, no.
And so in the next few minutes, everybody was yelling and calling for the resident. Ron would have been the intern. He would have been an MD, but not an OB, and so they were calling for him to get there. So Ron delivered our second child, our daughter, Lori, as the resident got there. And the resident, as he got there, he kept telling me, don't push, honey. And I thought, yeah, right. And so that way, Ron ended up doing most of the delivery, and it was in the bedroom, and it was, she was perfect, and it was a wonderful delivery, so I couldn't complain about that.
Well, that is a great story. Do you mind if we take a call?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, let's talk to Eli in Orlando, Florida. Welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, I just had 2 quick questions. One, what's Ron's favorite meal for you to cook for him? And 2, are you as interested in economics and finance as he is? Is that what you guys talk about around the dinner table?
Oh, thanks for the call. Okay, Carol, what do you think?
Well, Tom, you're going to have to repeat the question for me. I guess because of the 2 different phones and the static.
Oh, that's okay.
I didn't really get his question.
That's okay. It's a twofold question. One is, what is Ron's favorite meal for you to prepare for him? And secondly, do you enjoy economics as much as he does? And do you guys talk about it?
Oh, okay. Well, I can do the first. I guess his favorite meal is shrimp and rice. It's a casserole that a couple of the kids even ask for their birthday. It's in the new cookbook, and Ron really likes it. And he's not hard to cook for, though. He just likes everything, and he's always happy about what if he doesn't have to go to a restaurant, he's happier. But and as far as economics, no, I couldn't enjoy it as much as Ron does because, he started looking at economics as a hobby, and you know how you are about your hobby. I mean, now, if you want to talk to me about quilting or sewing or knitting or crocheting, I would probably be a whole lot more interested. But I do understand the economics that he's talking about, and I understand what he's doing. So I can probably talk either one slightly, but I'm much better at quilting.
Well, fair enough. Now, with regard to the cookbook, I understand the Wall Street Journal. Am I right about this? They interviewed you about the cookbook recently?
Yes. Yesterday, a young lady from the Wall Street Journal came down. She had been doing an interview with me because we've put out 11 issues of the Ron Paul Family Cookbook. And we started it in 1995 or 96 after Ron had been out of Congress for 12 years and they were having the contract with America. He said to me, you know, maybe they really are ready to have me come back. So we started the election, and it was a pretty bad election because the people up there knew he wasn't a yes man, and they, you know, kind of wanted a yes man. So they had gotten a Democrat to switch to Republican, and almost all the House members contributed to him. So we were, you know, running against a big force. So they were putting out material that, you know, said Ron wanted to give drugs to kids and terrible things. So I had said to him, well, you know, why don't we put out a cookbook with the kids' pictures and let them see that we're a real family and that we, you know, enjoy family life and that our kids have all done good things and nobody is doing drugs and nobody is in jail, and et cetera. So Ron said, oh, I don't know. He said, I think they probably would rather hear me talk about the Exchange Stabilization Fund or something like that. And I laughed and I said, no, I think they probably would like to know a little bit about the family. So he said, well, go ahead. He said, you know, it can't hurt. And, of course, now he calls the cookbook his secret weapon. So the Wall Street Journal reporter had heard about the cookbook, so she'd been interviewing me and about the cookbook, and then she talked to a few of people that had sent recipes in from around the country, a friend of mine from Ohio and another from Virginia, and she said, you know, could I come down and take some pictures of you cooking something in your kitchen? And so we thought about it, and I said, well, I guess that'd be okay. So she came down yesterday with a videographer and a photographer, and they watched me do some cooking. I was going to do the shrimp and rice, but I did a multi-grain linguine casserole that was a little bit low-fat and might be something good for today, and it is in the current cookbook. So we had a good afternoon.
Now, Carol, when back months ago, I haven't been with this Revolution PAC for some time now, but when I was with it, I think the whole organization validated itself a million times over in an ad that we did at a time when your husband was facing a lot of just terrible, terrible accusations. People were saying awful things about him, making him out to be a horrible person. And we produced this ad about this James Williams character whom Dr. Paul had helped as a young physician and hadn't billed him, and it involved an interracial child, and it was just the most tear-jerking, beautiful ad in the world. And it's the sort of thing that I think your husband doesn't brag enough, and I think we felt like here's a chance we're going to brag for him. So my question for you is, what kind of stories, what kind of things, as you, his wife, over 55 years, have you seen from him that you wish more of the world knew about, that would tell us, just vignettes of your lives together, that would tell us something about this man?
Well, I can tell you that those 55 years couldn't have been more perfect. It takes two people. Ron is a very easygoing person and very appreciative of things that people do for him, and it's just we have 5 great children, and all together we really do family things where we don't have to be entertained. An evening at home is very entertaining to us, and this has been the way we've always done all our sports with all our kids, and just really most of our life has been centered around home and family and church, things like that. So it's no real trauma. We're very fortunate and very blessed.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Now, Mike, I wonder it must be very challenging to have a congressman as a husband because he's got to spend so much time in Washington and you're apart for a while. So when he decided he was going to go back to Congress in the election in 96, were you reluctant or were you totally on board from the start?
No, I was totally on board from the start because well, I did have the sad reservations of him being out of medicine because he's a marvelous doctor. His patients just adored him. And but he had said to me, Carol, you know, the country is sick. And he said, you know, we need more people of the people, just real normal people up there in Congress to try to, you know, keep things going the way our country was started by our forefathers and following the Constitution. He felt like we were drifting away. And, I mean, all his ideas were so good, they were sound, and I could understand them. So I couldn't ask him not to do it because it is our country, and it is our children and yours. You know, I mean, it was too big a thing for me to not be behind.
Now, when you've gone with him to the presidential debates, you have presumably had some interaction, or even in other contexts, with the wives of the other candidates. Now, we've heard all these stories about Ann Romney, but what kind of a reception have you gotten? Has it been friendly, or has it been cool and disengaged?
No, my friendship with Ann Romney is very warm. She is a very nice person. She has 5 sons, and of course we have 5 children. We had a talking point more as moms. You know, we didn't get into the political realm, but they'd been married 44 years, and we've been married 55 years. You know, we had something in common right there. And you know, she wants to protect her kids and her husband. I mean, she's the kind of person that someone would want for a wife. And I think as far as a first lady, I think that she probably would be very good at it. But, I mean, she may do it differently, you know, than I would, but not that much because I think we're moms first, and that, you know, made it easier for us to get along.
Now, Carol, unfortunately we have only a couple minutes left, but do you have a favorite story or incident from the campaign trail, either last election or this time, that something that happened that just really moved you that you can share with us?
You know, I can't think of one just off the cuff, you know, at this moment, but anyone would be moved when you could see these young people, how they respond to Ron. One moment I remember, and I hate to talk about the state, but there was the voting didn't come like we thought it should, or according to our figures. And one of the young men was standing when they were making the announcement of what the numbers were, and just the tears in his eyes, just quietly, you know, just told me the depth that they feel when they had worked hours, night and day, and then everything, all the things that they'd predicted didn't come to pass. This was a little bit hard. And, you know, sometimes I always say that right wins in the end, but we don't know when the end will be. And it did turn out that there was a reversal of some of these votes, but they affect the people working in the campaign, and a lot of our workers are young, and they know what they're inheriting, and they understand what Ron's telling them, and they feel as though he hasn't been, you know, given a fair shake. So it's just, it's moving to me to see how these people respond to him, because they can pick up. I mean, Ron is honest as the day is long. He will not tell you what you want to hear. He's going to tell you what he believes and what he's studied, you know, is the right thing. And this is, young people can pick up on that. They know that he's not giving them a story, and also he has years of votes that they can look at. I mean, he didn't go to Washington to change where a lot of people do.
No, that's
they
right.
become part of the crowd. And sure, it would be nice to be part of the crowd and have a good time, but that isn't what he was there for. He was there to do something for our country. I mean, sure, it would be nice to go to parties at the White House and different things, but he was there for a reason, and he's been very serious about it. And so these young people take to heart, and we don't like to see them, you know, meeting things that aren't quite right. And it's, it's hard for them too.
Right. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. I'd love to continue this, but it's so wonderful to talk to you. Carol Paul, you are our First Lady, and we support you 100%. Thank you so much for the time today. That was Carol Paul, ladies and gentlemen, on the Peter Schiff Show. Tune in tomorrow for more. We'll see you then.